Hi everyone, it's Hayley here from the Gale Library in Newton, here with you live on this Monday at 4 o'clock with your Fablehaven Read Aloud. So we have literally got 3 chapters left. One I'm going to do today, the other 2 I'm going to read next week because we will not be here the following Monday. So by next Monday we will finish the whole of Brandon Mull's Fablehaven. So I have just pre-read this chapter and as I keep saying every week, I am loving this book and I still haven't read it to the end. I'm kind of reading along with you guys so I can be at the same place as you. But if you remember last time, Grandma Sorensen, Seth and Kendra had all gone to the Forgotten Chapel to try and save Grandpa Sorensen and Lena. But unfortunately, Seth and Grandma got captured and so did Hugo. Hugo got bashed into pieces. There was nothing left of him. And Kendra had to go and escape. So she ran out of the chapel, trying to think of how she could help them, trying to find ways she could help. So Brandon Mull's Fablehaven, let me just give you a quick last recap of chapter 16, the end of chapter 16. There were many knots, and it looked like Muriel could only undo one each time. Each knot seemed to take at least a few minutes, but still, at that rate, it will be a matter of hours, not days, before the demon was free. At least finding a weapon at the house was a goal. No matter how desperate the odds, it gave her a direction to head and a reason for going there. Who knew what the weapon would be, or how she would use it, or whether she could even get into the attic? But at least it was a plan. At least she could tell herself there was a brave reason for running away. So if you remember, Muriel is trying to free the demon Bahamut, who is going to destroy the whole of Fablehaven if he gets free. So Kendra is desperately trying to find a weapon or something to help her. At the moment, Kendra is protected because she has done no magic, she has caused no mischief in Fablehaven. So she is the safest of the whole family because she's protected by the laws of Fablehaven, if you remember that from last time. Okay, so chapter 17, everybody, is called A Desperate Gamble. This is Brandon Mull's Fablehaven, chapter 17. Dreading nightfall did not prevent it from happening. The sunset diminished and disappeared, until Kendra had the only light reflected from the half moon to guide her. The night grew cooler, but not cold. The forest was swathed in gloomy shadow. Occasionally she heard unsettling sounds, but she never caught sight of what made them. Although she glanced back frequently, the road behind remained as empty as the road ahead. Kendra alternated between jogging and walking. Without landmarks, it was difficult to discern how much ground she was covering. The dirt road seemed to stretch on forever. She was worried about Grandma Sorensen. Since she had shot Muriel and used Hugo to cripple the imps, there would probably be no protection for Grandma from similar torture. Kendra began to wish she had accepted Muriel's invitation to stay at the church with her family. The guilt of being the only escapee was almost too much for her to bear. It was hard to calculate the passage of time. The night wore on, as endless as the road. The moon gradually migrated across the sky. Or was it the road changing direction? Kendra felt certain she had been on the road for hours when she reached an open area. The moonlight showed a scant trail branching away from the road. It ran towards a tall, shadowy hedge. The pond with the gazebos. Finally, a landmark. She could not be more than half an hour from the house, and there was still no hint of dawn. How long before Bahamut was set free? Maybe the demon was already loose. Would she know it when it happened, or would she not find out until she was mobbed by monsters? Kendra rubbed her eyes. She felt weary. Her legs did not want to walk any further. She noticed that she was very hungry. She stopped and stretched for a minute. Then she started jogging. She could run the rest of the way, right? It wasn't too far. As she passed the meager trail branching from the road, Kendra slid it to a halt. A new thought had occurred to her, inspired by the irregular hedge looming off the side of the road. The Fairy Queen had a shrine on the island in the middle of the pond. Wasn't she supposed to be the most powerful person in the whole of fairy world? Maybe Kendra could try asking her for help. Kendra folded her arms. She knew so little about the Fairy Queen. Apart from hearing that the Queen was powerful, she had only heard that to set foot on her island meant certain death. Some guy had tried it and turned into dandelion seeds. But why had he tried it? Kendra did not think she had been given specific reason, just that he had a desperate need. But the fact that he had tried meant that he thought he might succeed. Maybe he just didn't have a good enough reason. Kendra considered her need. Her grandparents and her brother were about to be killed, and Fablehaven was about to be destroyed. That would be bad for the fairies too, wouldn't it? Or would the fairies not care? Maybe they would just go elsewhere. Indecisive, Kendra stared at the faint trail. What weapon did she expect to find at the house? Probably nothing, so she would most likely end up crashing through the gate or climbing at it to get away before Bahamut and Muriel caught up and finished her off, and her family would perish. But this fairy queen idea might work. If the queen was so powerful, she would be able to stop Muriel, and maybe even Bahamut. Kendra needed an ally. Despite her noble intentions, she could not see any way that she could succeed on her own. Kendra had felt a new sensation inside her ever since the idea had popped into her head. The feeling was so unexpected that it took a moment to recognize it as hope. There were no combination locks in the way. She just had to throw herself at the mercy of an all-powerful being and plead for her family. What was the worst that could happen? Death, but on her terms. No bloodthirsty imps, no witches, no demons, just a big poof of dandelion fluff. Was that the best possibility? The fairy queen could turn Muriel into dandelion seeds and rescue Kendra's family. Kendra stared down the trail. She felt butterflies in her stomach. It was an encouraging kind of nervousness, much preferable to the dread of certain failure. She started running. No crawling under the hedge this time. The path led to an archway. Kendra ran under the archway and into the manicured lawn. My powers got low. Getting to the island would be the first challenge. The pond was full of naiads who liked to drown people, which meant she needed a sturdy boat. Kendra hurried across the lawn towards the nearest gazebo. She tried to ignore the shifting shadows she saw ahead, various creatures ducking out of sight, anticipating what she was about to attempt. Kendra felt like her intestines were caught in an egg beater. She forced away all her fear. Would Grandpa turn and flee? Would Grandma? Would Seth? Or would they try their best to save her? She charged up the steps of the nearest pavilion and started running along the boardwalk. Her shoes pounded noisily against the boards, defying the silence. She saw her destination, the boathouse, 3 gazebos away. The surface of the lake was a black mirror reflecting the moonlight. A few twinkling fairies hovered just above the water. Otherwise, there was no sign of life. Kendra reached the pavilion attached to a small pier. She dashed down the steps and out onto the quay. She raced to the boathouse and tried the door. Just like before, it was locked. The door was not big, but it looked sturdy. Kendra kicked it, hard. The impact jolted up the length of her leg, making her wince. She rammed the door with her shoulder, again hurting herself instead of the door. Kendra stepped back. The boathouse was basically a large shed floating on water. It had no windows. She hoped it still had boats inside. If it did, they would be sitting in the water, protected by walls and a roof, but no floor. If she jumped into the lake, she could surface inside the boathouse and climb into a boat. She studied the water. The black reflective surface was impenetrable. There could be 100 naiads waiting in ambush, or none. It was impossible to tell. The whole plan would be pointless if she drowned before reaching the island. Based on what she had heard from Lena, there would be naiads eagerly waiting for her to get near the water. Jumping in would be suicide. She sat down and started bucking the door with both feet, the same method Seth used to break into the barn. She made a lot of noise, but did not seem to be harming the door at all. Kicking harder only made her legs hurt more. She needed a tool or a key or some dynamite. Kendra ran back up the pavilion, searching for something she could use to pry open the door. She saw nothing. If only there were a sledgehammer lying around. She tried to calm herself. She had to think. Maybe if she just kept pounding, the door would eventually give, sort of like erosion, but it hadn't budged yet, and she didn't have all night. There had to be a smarter solution. What did she have to work with? Nothing. Nothing but a few shadowy creatures who ducked out of sight at her approach. "Okay, listen up," she shouted. "I know you can hear me. I have to get inside the boathouse. A witch is setting Bahamut free, and all of Fablehaven is going to be destroyed. I'm not asking for anybody to stick their necks out. I just need somebody to beat down the boathouse door. My grandfather is a caretaker here. I give you my full permission. I'm going to turn my back and close my eyes. When I hear the door break, I'll wait 10 seconds before turning around." Kendra closed her eyes. She heard nothing. "Any time, just smash down the door. I promise I won't look." She heard a gentle splash and a twinkling sound. "Okay, sounds like we have a taker. Just break down the door." She heard nothing. She suddenly realized that something could have emerged from the water and be sneaking up behind her. Unable to resist, she turned and peeked. No dripping creatures were in sight. All was quiet. There were ripples on the previously glassy pond, and lying on the dock near the boathouse was a key. Kendra rushed down the stairs, picked up the key. It was wet, corroded, and slimy. Longer than a regular key, it looked old-fashioned. Wiping it against her shirt, she carried the key to the boathouse and inserted it into the keyhole. It fit perfectly. She turned it and the door swung inward. Kendra shivered. The implications were disturbing. Apparently, a Naiad had tossed her the key. They wanted her out on the water. With only the moonlight seeping through the door to provide illumination, the boathouse was very dim. Squinting, Kendra could see 3 boats tied to the narrow pier. 2 large boats, one slightly broader than the other, and a smaller paddle boat. The paddle boat was the kind with the bicycle pedals. Kendra had once ridden in one at the park on the lake. In the park with the lake. On one wall hung several oars of varying length. Near the door were a crank and a lever. Kendra tried to turn the crank, but nothing would move. She pulled the lever. Nothing happened. She tried the crank again. This time it turned. A sliding door on the opposite side of the boathouse from the dock began to open, letting in more light. Kendra kept cranking, relieved that she would be able to paddle the boat out directly onto the pond. Standing in the gloom of the boathouse, staring out at the open door at the pond, Kendra began to doubt. She felt nauseated with fear. Was she really prepared to go out to her death? To have the Naiads drown her? To fall victim to a spell protecting a forbidden island? Grandpa and Grandma Sorensen were resourceful. They may have already escaped. Was she doing all this for nothing? Kendra remembered an occasion 3 years ago at a community pool. She had desperately wanted to jump off the high dive. Her mum had warned her that it was higher than it looked, but nothing could dissuade her. Many kids were jumping off it, several her age or younger. She stood in line at the base of the ladder, and when her turn came, she started climbing, amazed at how much higher she seemed with each step. When she arrived at the top, she felt like she was standing on a skyscraper. She wanted to turn back, but all the kids in line would know she was scared. Plus, her parents were watching. She walked forward along the diving board. There was a slight breeze. She wondered if the people on land could feel it. When she approached the end of the board, she stared down at the rippling water. She could see all the way to the bottom of the pool. Jumping no longer seemed like the fun thing to do. Realizing that the longer she hesitated, the more attention she would draw, she turned around quickly and descended the ladder, trying to avoid eye contact with the people waiting in line at the bottom. She had not been up a high dive ever since. In fact, she rarely took any sort of risk. Once again, she was standing on the brink of something frightening, but this was different. Jumping off a high dive, or riding a roller coaster with multiple loops, or passing a note to Scott Thomas, those were all voluntary thrills. There was no real consequence to avoiding the risk. In her current situation, her family would probably die if she failed to act. She had to stand by her previous decision and carry out the plan, regardless of the consequences. Kendra considered the oars. She had never rowed a boat and could easily picture herself floundering, especially if the nasty Naiads were giving her a hard time. She examined the paddle boat. Designed for a single passenger, it was wider than it needed to be, presumably for additional stability. The childish craft was not nearly as big as a rowboat's, and she would be closer to the water, but at least Kendra thought she could maneuver it. Kendra sighed. Kneeling, she untied the little boat, tossing the slender rope into the sea. The paddle boat wobbled when she stepped aboard, and she had to crouch and use her hands to avoid falling in the water. The bottom of the novelty craft was completely closed, which meant nothing could grab at her feet. After getting situated, Kendra sat facing the dock. There was a steering wheel to control the lateral movement. Turning the wheel all the way to one side, she pedaled backwards and slid away from the dock. Cranking the wheel the other way, she started pedaling forward, and the boat quietly slid out of the boathouse. Ripples radiated from out front of the paddle boat as she steered it toward the island, pedaling briskly. The island was not far, maybe 80 yards. The paddle boat moved steadily closer to her destination, until it started moving away from the island. She pedaled harder, but the boat kept sliding diagonally backward. Something was towing her. The boat began to spin. Turning the wheel and paddling did nothing. Then the boat suddenly tilted precariously to one side. Something was trying to tip her. Kendra leaned to prevent the boat from capsizing, and the boat abruptly rocked the other way. Kendra changed position, counterbalancing desperately. She saw her wet fingers holding the side of the boat and slapped at them. The action was rewarded by giggling. The boat began to rotate quickly. "Leave me alone," Kendra demanded. "I have to get to the island." This earned a longer titter from the multiple voices. Kendra paddled furiously, but it did no good. She kept spinning and getting hauled in the wrong direction. The Naiads started rocking the boat again. Thanks to the low center of gravity, Kendra found that leaning was enough to prevent the boat from capsizing, but the Naiads were relentless. They tried to distract her by banging the bottom of the vessel and by waving at her. The boat pitched and rocked and spun, and then suddenly the Naiads would heave in earnest, trying to catch her off balance. Time after time, Kendra reacted quickly, shifting her weight to spoil their attempts to flip her. It was a stalemate. The Naiads did not show themselves. She heard their laughter, glimpsed their hands, but never saw a face. Kendra decided to quit paddling. It was getting her nowhere and wasting energy. She resolved to exert herself only to keep the boat from tipping. The attempts grew less frequent. She said nothing, made no response at the taunting giggles, ignored the hands on the side of the boat. She simply leaned as needed when they tried to tip the boat. She was getting better at it. They were not able to tilt it as much. The attempts stopped. After about a minute of no activity, Kendra started paddling toward the island. Her progress was soon halted. She quit paddling immediately. The naiad spun her and rocked her some more. She waited. After another minute of tranquility, she paddled again. Again, they pulled her away, but less eagerly. She sensed them giving up, getting bored. On her 8th try using these techniques, the naiads apparently lost interest. The island grew closer, 20 yards, 10 yards. She expected them to stop her at the last moment. They didn't. The front of a paddleboat scraped against the shore and everything remained still. The moment of truth had arrived. When she set foot on the island, either she would transform into a cloud of dandelion fluff and drift away, or she wouldn't. Almost indifferent at this point, Kendra leaped out of the boat and landed on shore. There did not seem to be anything magical or even special about it, and she did not turn into a cloud of seeds. There was, however, a barrage of laughter from behind her. Kendra whirled in time to see her paddleboat drifting away from the island. It was already too late to do anything without jumping into the water. She slapped herself on the forehead with the heel of her hand. The naiads had not given up. They were trying a different strategy. She had been so distracted by the prospect of becoming a dandelion fluff that she had not hauled the boat out of the water as she should have. She should have at least kept hold of the rope. Well, one more favour to ask the Fairy Queen. The island was not large. It took only about 70 paces for Kendra to walk around the edge of it. Her tour of the perimeter revealed nothing interesting. The shrine was probably near the centre. Although the island had no trees, it had many shrubs, many of them taller than Kendra. There were no trails, and pressing through them was irritating. What would the shrine look like? She had pictured a little building, but after crisscrossing the island a few times, she realised there was no such structure. Maybe she had not turned into dandelion seeds because the island was a hoax, or maybe the shrine was no longer here. Either way, she was stranded on a tiny island in the middle of a pond full of creatures who wanted to drown her. What would drowning feel like? Would she actually inhale water or just pass out? Or would the demon get to her first? No, she had come this far. She would look again, more carefully. Maybe this shrine was something natural, like a special bush or a stump. She walked around the perimeter of the island again, more slowly this time. She noticed a thin trickle of water. It was strange to find a stream, no matter how small, on such a tiny island. She followed the stream towards the centre of the island until she found the place where it came bubbling out of the ground. There, at the source of the spring, was a 2-inch-tall statue of a fairy, finely carved. It rested on a white pedestal that added a few more inches to the height. A small silver bowl sat in front of it. Of course! Fairies were so tiny, it made sense that the shrine would be miniature as well. Kendra fell to her knees beside the spring, directly in front of the small figurine. The night was very still. Looking into the sky, Kendra noticed that the eastern horizon was turning purple. Night was coming to an end. All Kendra could do was pour her heart out in complete sincerity. "Hello, Fairy Queen. Thank you for letting me visit you without changing me into dandelion seeds." Kendra swallowed. This felt weird, talking to a diminutive statue. There was nothing regal about it. "If you can help me, I really need it. A witch named Muriel is about to set a demon free named Bahamut. The witch has my grandma and Grandpa Sorensen prisoner, along with my brother Seth and my friend Lena. If that demon gets out, it will wreck this whole preserve. There's no way I can stop it from happening without your help. Please, I really love my family, and if I don't do something, that demon he's going to... The reality of what she was saying hit her like a great weight and spilled out as tears. For the first time, the fact that Seth was going to die fully entered her mind. She thought of memories with him, both endearing and annoying, and realised that there would be no more of either. She shook with sobs. Her tears streamed down her cheeks. She let them come. She needed the release to stop trying to suppress the horror of it all. The tears she had shed while fleeing the forgotten chapel had been of shock and terror. These were tears of realisation. Tears slid down her chin and plopped into the silver bowl. Her breathing came in ragged grasps between sobs. "Please help me," she finally managed. An aromatic breeze drifted over the island. It smelled of rich soil, new blossoms, with just a hint of the sea. Her crying began to subside. Kendra brushed the tears from her cheeks and wiped her nose on her sleeve. She sniffed, amazed at how swiftly congestion could appear. The miniature statue was wet. Had she cried on it? No. Water was seeping from its eyes, trickling down the silver bowl. The air stirred again, still redolent with potent aromas. Kendra inexplicably sensed a presence. She was no longer alone. "I accept your offering and join you in weeping." The words were not audible, but they struck her mind with such forceful impression that Kendra gasped. She had never experienced anything similar. Clear fluid continued to streak from the statue into the bowl. "From tears, milk, and blood, devise an elixir, and my handmaidens will attend you." The tears were obvious. All Kendra could do was picture Viola for the milk. Whose blood? Her own? The cow's? The handmaidens had to be the fairies. "Wait, what do I do?" Kendra asked. "How do I get off the island?" In reply, the wind swirled for a moment, and then gusted. The pleasant aromas vanished. The little statue no longer wept. The indefinable presence had departed. Kendra picked up the bowl. About the size of her palm, it was nearly a third of the way full. She had hoped that the Fairy Queen would resolve the situation for her. Instead, she had apparently shown her a way to resolve the problem herself. The telepathic message felt as precise as the spoken words. Her family was still in danger, but the spark of hope was now aflame. How would she get off the island? Rising, Kendra walked to the shore. Unbelievably, the paddle boat was drifting in her direction. It steadily approached until reaching the island. Kendra stepped inside the boat. It pulled away from the shore spontaneously and turned around, started towards a little white pier. Kendra said nothing. She did not paddle. She was afraid to do anything that might disrupt the effortless progress to the pier. She held the little bowl in her lap, careful not to spill a drop. When she saw it, a dark figure standing on the pier, awaiting her return. A puppet the size of a man, Mendigo, her throat constricted with fear. She had worked magic on the island, getting the tears from the statue. That was magic, right? Her protector's status was finished, and Mendigo came to apprehend her. "Can you drop me off someplace else?" she asked. The boat moved steadily forward. What could she do? Even if they dropped her off elsewhere, Mendigo would just follow. The boat was 20 yards from the pier, then 10. She had to protect the contents of her bowl, and she could not let Mendigo haul her away. But how could she stop him? The paddle boat brushed up against the pier, coming to stop alongside it. Mendigo had made no move to grab her. He seemed to be waiting for her to disembark. Kendra set the bowl on the pier and stood up, noticing that the boat was being held steady. I'm hoping my phone has enough charge. If I go off, check out YouTube for the recording of the rest. I hope I don't. Where was we? Mendigo could not seem to grab her. He stood with both arms half raised, fingers fluttering. Kendra picked up the bowl and walked around the lumberjack. Mendigo followed her along the path of the pier. Why would Muriel have sent Mendigo after her if he could not seize her? Did Muriel know that she had communed with the Fairy Queen? If so, the puppet sure moved quickly. His being there was probably precautionary. The problem it posed was severe. Evidently, Kendra had not actually worked magic on the island. She had merely collected an ingredient. But in concocting the elixir the Fairy Queen described and given it to the fairies, she would certainly be performing magic. The moment her protected status ended, Mendigo would be on her. That was not an option. Kendra set the silver bowl on the steps leading to the gazebo. Then she turned and confronted Mendigo. The puppet was more than half a head taller than her. "I think you work like Hugo. You have no brain, and you just do as you're told. Is that right, Mendigo?" The lumberjack stood still. Kendra tried not to get creeped out. "I have a feeling you won't obey me, but it's worth a try. Mendigo, go and climb a tree and sit up there forever." Mendigo stood motionless. Kendra walked straight at him. He was trying to lift his arms to grab her, but was unable to carry out the intention. Standing close to him, she reached out a tentative finger and touched his wooden torso. He did not react, except to continue struggling against whatever force prevented him from seizing her. "You can't touch me. I haven't done anything mean or used any magic, but I can touch you." She gently stroked both of his arms just beneath the shoulders. The lumberjack jittered with the effort of trying to grasp her. "Want to see my second decisive move of the night?" she asked. Mendigo quivered, hooks jingling, but remained powerless to take hold of Kendra. Unconsciously biting her lower lip, she grabbed both arms just below the shoulders, unhooked them, and dashed away from the lumberjack. She heard the overgrown puppet chasing her as she raced to the edge of the pond and hurled the wooden arms into the water. Something clipped Kendra's shoulder and sent her spinning to the ground. A crashing force pressed against her back, pinning her down. She could hardly breathe. Craning her neck, she saw Mendigo looming over her, using his foot to hold her in place. How could a creature that looked so flimsy be so strong? The spot where he had kicked her stung deep. It was certainly bruised. Kendra reached for his other leg, hoping to unhook the shin, but the puppet danced out of reach. For a moment, Mendigo appeared indecisive. Kendra prepared to roll away just in case he charged and tried to kick her again. If she could just unhook a leg. Instead, Mendigo hurried to the pier. Both his arms were floating on the water. One had almost drifted within reach of the pier. Mendigo crouched, balancing carefully on one foot, and stretched out a leg towards the nearest arm. Just as his toes made contact, a white hand shot up out of the water and seized Mendigo by the ankle, yanking him into the pond with a splash. Kendra waited, holding her breath as she watched. The lumberjack did not resurface. She dashed back to the steps and picked up the bowl. Kendra dared not to run while holding the tears. Instead, she walked swiftly, carefully not to waste any of her precious cargo. She walked across the lawn, through the arch, down the path, and onto the road. Stars continued to fade in the eastern sky. Kendra hurried along the road. She was pretty sure her sheltered status was at an end. But if mischief had to be done, at least it felt worthwhile. She had a feeling it would not be her final mischievous act of the night. That was the end of chapter 17. Next week is chapter 18 and 19 and the end of the book. Chapter 18 is called Bahumat and chapter 19 is called Farewell to Fablehaven. So we will be back next Monday at 4 o'clock, same time, same place, with the last 2 chapters of Brandon Mull's Fablehaven. Don't forget, the library is open. You can come and see us in the building on Mondays and Wednesdays from 12 until 6, on Tuesdays and Saturdays from 9 until 1. So we hope to see you guys soon. Take care and have a fantastic week. Bye.